that is possible.
Daughter Excellency Randia Mandrato, it's your turn, sir. 4 minutes.
Je ne pense pas.
Well, I do not think that Pan-Africanism is actually dying out. No, because Pan-Africanism is in us. We are Pan-Africanists. You cannot erase the history of this continent, the history which also includes the efforts of our diaspora. So Pan-Africanism is really not dying in Africa. It is true that we all have a huge responsibility. The current generation that we have to work to make sure that the future generation should not forget what our founding fathers actually had in mind when they were establishing the OAU, so that all those who are in Africa should continue to live the same dream the same dream. We inherited this continent from our founding fathers, and we have the Africa that we want. The Africa that we see is the Africa where we live in, and the Africa that we want is the Africa that we want to prepare and which we must prepare. And so there is a clear difference between the Africa in which we are and the African Union, which is our own home, the common house. And if the African Union Commission does not put in the right resources, the human resources and the financial resources, even the diplomats and the military, we will not get to where we want to be. And so I am of the opinion that it all depends on the will of the people to go beyond the challenges that we face today. We all know the problems of our African Union today. There are certain aspects that do not meet the expectations of the people. For example, the SACA audit that was prepared by experts proposing reforms that have to be undertaken. We also have reforms that were undertaken in 2016. So we need to undertake those reforms to ensure that the African Union can actually rise to the challenges. The regional economic communities also have a role to play. I went to COMESA for several years and actually saw the efforts undertaken by countries of COMESA and East Africa. And we see Tunisia, Egypt in COMESA as well, and this will continue. We have the Abuja Treaty actually defined gradual integration at the regional level and then continental level, and I know we will get there. And I am going to work with the members of the next commission so that together we can actually make all of this easy. And lastly, I think we should also bear in mind, we should also think about the military bases, the foreign military bases in Africa, in African countries. Some countries have already started to take their own destiny in their hands in terms of their security. We should be brave enough, we should actually have that courage to make sure that we can actually stand out there as adults that can actually take their destiny in their own hands. Foreign military bases in Africa, we do hope that in a few years' time, those military bases will be a thing of the past, because this military base is actually a source of conflict. Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellency Randia Mandrato, candidate of Madagascar. Now we listen to Raila Amolo Odinga, candidate of Kenya.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the inter-African trade, which today stands just at 15%. Inter-European trade, on the other hand, stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade stands at 60%. Africa trades more with the external world than with itself, wasting a lot of resources. Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people. And that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized their economy, the manufacturing units in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there was cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor. Secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youths drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because you have not created conditions that can retain them here. Now we are saying that we want to create a situation where every African youth must be connected to the internet, and using the artificial intelligence and information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth, and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent so that Africa moves.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Raila Odinga, finishing us on the third round. And now we move into the fourth and final round, and I give my sister the opportunity to open the envelope and tell us what the first or the last question rather is. And ladies and gentlemen, as a form of a reminder, after this we have a quick break, and after the break each of our esteemed candidates will have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks. Fatima?
Dear candidates, your question is this one. The implementation of the key reforms at the African Union that were decided by the Assembly of Heads of State and Government has come to a standstill, and which has a negative impact on the structural stability and the financial viability of the Union, and also on the lack of the African Union to have an impact. Were you to become the chairperson, what new approaches would you adopt to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, rationalize the programs of the African Union, and strengthen its effectiveness in the long term?
under the topic of implementing of reforms agreed under the Assembly Decision 635, the implementation of key African Union reforms decided by the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments has stalled, with an adverse impact on its structural viability and financial sustainability, and the AU's focus on a few high-impact public goods. If you become chairperson, what new approaches will you introduce to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, streamline the AU's agenda, and strengthen its long-term effectiveness?
Et j'invite à présent le candidat.
I'd like to invite the candidate from Madagascar to respond first. First of all, we have to begin by